All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started as people continue to make their way onto the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronica Buckwalter, Project Director for the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. Welcome to today's webinar entitled NSAESC Lessons Learned, Improving Attendance and Keeping Students on Track. Before we begin today, I want to share some brief details about the webinar. Today's webinar will last for approximately 60 minutes with time built in for questions. And everyone has been automatically placed on mute upon entry into the webinar. Only our panelists will be unmuted throughout the presentation. Therefore, if you have questions or comments throughout the presentation, we encourage you to use either the chat or the Q&A box, which are both found at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Submitting questions or comments in either one of those spots will come to us, so we'll be sure to receive them. Just make sure that you select all panelists when you're using the chat box. There are different folks that you can direct your comments to, so just be sure that you're sending them to all panelists so that we're sure to see them. We'll be monitoring these boxes for comments and questions throughout the webinar. So hopefully we'll be able to get to everyone's questions. If not, we'll try to record who's asking certain questions, and we'll try to get back to you by email. So this webinar will be recorded, and the recording of this presentation and the slides will be made available to all registrants, and it will also be posted on the National Technical Assistance Center's website. A link to this website will be provided to you several times through the chat function throughout the course of today's presentation, so just be on the lookout for that URL to come through the chat box. And we encourage you to visit that website to access webinar recordings, materials from events and presentations that we've held. There are numerous resources on that website available for you to browse through or download at your convenience. So today's webinar is the last one being offered through the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. As many of you know, our contract is coming to an end at the end of this month. So this is really our closeout webinar for the 2-year period where we've been, coordinating this work. So the National Technical Assistance Center was launched in 2016 and is funded by the Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. The 2 communities of practice referred to in the center's mission are focused on the 30 national My Brother's Keeper Success Mentor sites and the many SIG and SIG-eligible schools throughout the country that are working to implement early warning system programs to address chronic absenteeism. At the bottom of this page, you will see the URL for the Center's Technical Assistance website with all of our recorded webinars and many other resources and presentations. Unfortunately, because we load the slides as a PDF, you won't be able to click on that webinar, but as I mentioned, I will put that in the chat function for you where you will be able to copy and paste it into a browser after the presentation. So today's webinar is being presented by Dr. Robert Balfans. Dr. Balfans is a research professor at the Center for the Social Organization of Schools at Johns Hopkins University School of Education, where he is director of the Everyone Graduates Center. He's a leader and co-founder of Diplomas Now, an evidence-based school transformation model for high-needs middle and high schools, which combines whole school reform with enhanced student support guided by an early warning system, and winner of a federal Investing in Innovation Validation Grant, which is currently being implemented in 40 schools across 12 districts. He's published widely on secondary school reform, high school dropouts, early warning systems, chronic absenteeism, school climate, and instructional interventions in high poverty schools. So Bob, at this point, I am going to go ahead and give the presenter ball to you, and you should be able to move the slides forwards on your own from here on out.
Great. Thank you, Veronica, and welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to share to you some key lessons we've learned over the 2 years working with the National Center for Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success. And what I wanted to start with is, although I'm going to try to summarize some key learnings, there's no way that's possible in a webinar. So I do want to just remind folks that over the course of the past 2 years, we've done 40 webinars, which are available on the website that Veronica spoke about. We've had 4 convenings, and on the website you can find the conference presentations from all of those convenings. And we've built a number of tools and technical assistance supports that are also on the website. So at some level, our lessons learned are already organized on that website, and again, I encourage you to really go there and explore it and take advantage of the rich amount of work that's come out of both the Success Mentor and Early Warning communities of practices. Today, though, I really want to focus on sharing some key ideas that we've learned over these years, and really this big idea that 2 of our most powerful things at our disposal are data and relationships, that they're sort of like water and air. They are abundant. We may have to do something with them to make them useful to where we are, but they are a powerful resource that is there that when put together, we're going to make the case in this webinar, is really some of the most fundamental things we can do to enable kids to be in school every day, be focused when they're there, get their work done, and succeed. And the reason why we need to think about this and worry about this is that we know that poverty in particular makes it harder to attend school on a regular basis and succeed in school. And we know that many of our students in our public school systems come from low-income families, and many others do that and also live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, and that those kids are also then concentrated within subsets of schools that have high levels of student need. So we really have to think about how we create a counterforce to these impacts of poverty, because that is really how the way poverty taxes student achievement is by making it harder to come to school every day, to putting barriers to regular attendance, to making it harder to focus once you're in school, to making it harder to get your work done. And if we don't have a counterforce to that, we can see why those students don't succeed. Because if you can't come to school on a regular basis, if you can't focus, if you can't get your work done, you're not going to, it's very clear that you will not succeed in school. So what is that counterforce? And that's what we're going to focus on today. And our argument is that using data and relationships, we can combat chronic absenteeism and keep students on track. So let's explore this a little. What does data give us? Well, data lets us know where chronic absenteeism challenges are the greatest, and as we've seen from the most recent national data, while you could find chronic absenteeism everywhere, it is strongly concentrated in a subset of schools, both urban and rural, often held together by their levels of student need. And the reason why we need to understand where schools have different levels of chronic absenteeism is it lets us intentionally organize our resources to meet those different levels of need. One of the things we struggle with sometimes in education is we want to have universal solutions for universal locations and say, well, all schools should have good strategies to keep their kids in place. Here's what all schools should do. But oftentimes, those all-school strategies are not sufficient in the most impacted schools. So it's really important for communities and states to use their data, especially that which is going to be now available under ESSA, to really identify which districts and within them which schools are most impacted by chronic absenteeism, and then really work to make sure that we align the right resources to meet that level of needs. Data is also powerful within schools and districts because it lets us find patterns and trends that enable strategic solutions. Instead of trying to find an individual solution for every chronically absent kid, and you could do that if a school had 5 chronically absent students, they're not going to be doing individual interventions if they have 200 chronically absent students. So data, the air and our air and water metaphor, really lets us identify patterns and trends that enables us to have strategic interventions that impact groups of students at a time, not just a student. Might let us see that there's certain days of the month that attendance is better or worse, and what does that tell us about our strategies? Or there's a subset of kids on a certain bus route that are chronically not coming because we investigate, we learn that if they miss one bus, there's not another bus for another hour and a half. Things like that, using data to find patterns and trends, makes it much more manageable to address the intensity of student needs. Data also helps us identify root causes, right? We have to really understand what's behind the reason kids are continually not coming to school. And as we're going to talk more in detail in a minute, it's really important to get that reason right because if you guess wrong, you can actually make it worse and not better. And then finally, the thing that's the power of data is it lets us track our impact of efforts. It enables continuous improvement. And in truth, one of the things we've learned is this is the one area where often people just run out of energy. That's with a lot of work to get the data, to get it analyzed, to figure out smart strategic interventions, and then they're off to do it. And they don't take the time, or that it slips the mind, or something else gets in the way, and they don't actually record what the plan was, what the intervention was, so they can come back later and actually see if it worked, right? If you don't record the intervention, it's impossible to know later on, did it really happen, was it implemented? And that makes it very hard to do the thing that needs to be done over time, is to really learn what set of strategies work for which kids under which circumstances. That's when you really build strong local knowledge of how to address chronic absenteeism and keep kids on track. And that doesn't happen if we don't take the last data step of recording what we're going to do, making sure kids actually get the intervention, and then analyzing if it worked and for which kids it did work. An ironic thing, and I'll just say one more thing and move on, is that what often happens is that we'll decide an intervention, we'll assume it's given, we won't track if the kid who is chronically absent, we know this already, is there often enough to get the intervention, and then we'll come back and say it didn't work. So we often fall into the very same trap other folks fall into even before they've acknowledged there is chronic absenteeism. All right, relationships. And this is basically our argument, air and water, or big data meets the human touch. Or as a colleague of mine once said, you know, nothing beats Big Blue, the IBM supercomputer, besides Big Blue and another person, right? So this is the person side of the equation, the human intelligence side of it, along with the data. And we know that relationships, positive relationships, are key to increasing attendance and keeping kids on track. It lets us gain a deeper understanding of root causes. Although we can't always interpret just from the numbers why a kid is not coming, it depends on talking to them and having a strong enough relationship and enough trust in the relationship that they will trust us and give us a real answer. Having strong relationships with students enables both prevention and intervention to be more successful. We as adults are much more likely to do something because we were asked to do it or requested to do it or reminded to do it or encouraged to do it by someone we have a positive relationship towards. We're much less likely to do it just because somebody in authority that we don't really know and don't have strong connections to just tells us to do it. It's the same for kids. And relationships are an intervention in and of themselves. Time and time again, the evidence is clear that strong, positive adult and student relationships are really the strongest antidotes we have to combat the negative stress impacts of poverty. One of the best counterforces to poverty making it harder to come every day, focus in class, get your work done, is an adult or adults or other kids encouraging you to come, helping you stay focused, creating conditions that enable you to get that work done, and creating motivations and reasons for you to do all of those. And that speaks to this fundamental point that once a student is chronically absent, you need to either solve a problem or change a behavior. And it's hard to do that without a positive relationship between the student and his or her family. So we need the air and the water. Excuse me. Data plus relationships, when we put them together, now let us unpack and address the contributing factors to chronic absenteeism. Now, if you've been with us before over the history of our center and our convenings and webinars, I'm sure you've seen this. Our friends at attendance work use this widely as well. It's the point that the reason kids don't come to school can really fall into 4 big buckets. Myths, they don't think it's any big deal, doesn't really matter until years later. Missing 2 days a month doesn't really change much. Barriers, something that's keeping you out of school, making it harder for you and able to get to school. Aversion or avoidance, there's something in school you're avoiding. And ultimately then disengagement, you don't see the point. And as I said before, as you could see, is if we guess a reason why a student is not coming to school and we get it wrong, one could easily see it backfiring on us. So if we're assuming it's just disengagement or a myth and we sort of give the kids sort of the tough love speech and how their future depends on them being on school every day, and they're sort of not doing their part to make their future to succeed. And that kid is staying home to do elder care for the great aunt or grandparent that raised them, and they don't know who else can do it. They are not going to have a positive response to your attempt to say, you've got to become more serious about coming to school, because we got the reason wrong in our guess. And that's why we really have to take the time to bring data and relationships together to really understand why kids are not coming in order to have effective solutions to enable them to come every day. Now, we can take it a step further. When data and relationships are combined into an organized prevention and progress, into an organized prevention system, sorry, words missing there, and paired with progress monitoring and a response system, we could reduce chronic absenteeism and keep students on track. And now I'm going to go deeper now into a really strong example of that we really learned from and developed and had good success and learnings from in our Success Mentor community of practice. All right, and this is really what we call the School Success Mentor and Student Support Model. And as you can see, we have data front and center, and then we have relationships weaved throughout it. And I'm going to go through each of these pieces in detail in a minute, but the main idea is we need to combine data on chronic absenteeism with a time to review it, a student success meeting and data review. We need to pair chronically absent kids with success mentors to build those relationships, to both get at root causes, create a reason for them to be there, and just create an environment conducive to their success. We need to do prevention strategies to make school a welcoming place and have the right messaging to parents and kids to enable them to see the importance of schooling every day and help them solve their problems standing in the way. We need better linkages to youth and service social providers when those relationships and root cause analysis and digging uncovers unmet out-of-school needs that the school itself is not in a position to meet. We need to have the people that are at the table, not with just a hope of a referral and a hope that it happens. So let's dig deeper now into this system that's been shown to be quite effective. It's, as I say, an evidence-based model. We're going to show some of the data in a minute that improves attendance by creating this whole system of data reviews, success mentors, connections with youth service providers, and working on whole school activities to improve attendance. We sort of just had our visual picture and our written picture for our visual and our text-based learners. So what are some key lessons we've learned about creating an effective success mentor and student support program? And I'll pause for some questions in a minute too, but I'll just go a little further. So, surprise, surprise, right? We're right back with data as being a central ingredient. And for this to work, that weekly team or biweekly, if weekly is not possible, it has to be no less frequent than biweekly. We've learned to be effective. You need to be able to look at data and trends at the individual classroom, grade, and school level. They need the data organized in a way that it's pretty easy to switch between those levels of aggregation. This really supports the idea of that strategic analysis, that if we find here several individuals that are suddenly chronically absent, and then we find they come from the same classroom and the same grade, that might give us some clues at a higher level to sort of intervene than kid by kid. We want our data to tell us when students have crossed the threshold and missed 10% of school to date. When chronic absenteeism work began, it was not uncommon for people to use a measure of, a kid is flagged once they miss 20 days of school for the year, or 15 days, or 10 days. That's not bad to get a sense of where chronic absenteeism is, to organize resources at a more global level, but it doesn't let you act quickly on the ground in a school because you're waiting until they cross that threshold, and by then they've established patterns and maybe the problems driving it and become ingrained. So you really want data that lets you know as soon as kids miss 10% of school year to date. Now, obviously, you're going to have a different response if that's November than December, but still in all, it's really important to track and at least have a conversation, just checking in. We noticed you missed 3 days already this month. What's going on? Maybe the kid has had bronchitis, nothing to worry about. Or maybe something's changed in their home life that's making it harder to get to school, and it's going to be easier to solve it now than to wait 3 months until it gets more embedded. Your data, you want the data to be able to tell you when a student without prior history of chronic absenteeism are trending towards it or become chronically absent. So let me explain a little more clearly. On one hand, we want to know who starts the year with being chronically absent, because then we know that, that chronic absenteeism brings chronic absenteeism. That if kids have been chronically absent in prior years, absent intervention, the odds are they will continue to be chronically absent. So it's important to know who walks in the door with that history so we can have interventions and progress monitoring in place right away. And the same token, why it's so important to do that 10% of school to date rule is there's sort of a golden moment, just like sort of that golden hour often they talk about in medicine, which is when a student who has no prior history of chronically absent is just trending towards it or has become it, because that tells us there's something very current has happened. There's been some change, either a new problems arise or there's been a shift in their environments. It's something current. And it's, again, much easier often to solve something that's current than something that's been embedded. So it's really both important to be able to track both those groups of kids with your data. Okay. This is just our visual picture of our weekly attendance meeting. It's really important. We're going to see in a minute to have a principal there, at least at the start, and then it could be a designee, but to show this is important and it matters to the school. People from the school, people from the mentors who are mentoring, these outside partners, and it's really this strategic collaboration and everybody bringing their insights into why kids are not coming and what the most effective interventions are to that work. So some of the best practices we've learned about these meetings is it's really important that they're regularized. If there's a date and a time that they happen, people know they're going to happen. They're not, they started and we stopped them, then we put them to a different date and no one's really sure when they are, and they're not sure if they're really necessary or they're voluntary or they're occasional. That never works, right? You need the same time, same place, and a standard agenda. So it's really got a protocol to it. It needs to be sanctioned and led by the school leadership, again, to demonstrate that it's real and this is a priority for the school. As we talk about our success mentors in the middle, they need representation at the table. You know, it's often there's too many of them to be at the table, but you need a way to have communication between the mentors and sort of the data and leadership teams. We want those community-based partners to give us better integration of youth and social services. Again, maybe it's not every week, but once a month. Many people have found there's a good sequence and good rhythm for those community-based partners to be there. And many people often are rightly concerned about data confidentiality, but again, many districts are able to solve this by getting those partners to sign confidentiality agreements and then only give them access to limited amounts of data just for the kids that they are serving. It's very important that if you are a success mentor or you're trying to get someone to come to school, you do have to know if they in fact are coming to school, right? So at that level, we do have to solve this data sharing, but many districts have been able to do this through assorted versions of confidentiality agreements and limiting it just to very specific parts of the data about the student. All right. All right, now we talked a little bit about this idea. Now we're getting to our relationships and who forms these relationships. Where do you find the person power, right? If you have 50, 100, 150, 200 kids chronically absent, where do you find the person power to have relationships with that number of kids? Well, what folks have been developing over the past several years is the idea of a success mentor. And these are caring adults or peers with training and supports who work with chronically absent students to address the barriers keeping from school. We found, again, as sort of good practice and effective practice, that this is a fairly regular interactions are necessary on the order of 3 times a week. Now, 2 of those 3 interactions can be quite brief, 30 seconds. So excited to see you today. You make my day when you see you. It's marvelous to see you in school. I feel so happy to see you. Are you ready to have a good day? Is there anything I can do to help you? Are you ready to be focused in your classes? Fantastic. And you know, you're going to be here tomorrow, right? I expect to see you tomorrow. And if not, you know I'll come find you, right? 30 seconds, but it has to happen regular basis. And then once a week, it needs to be a longer session, an advisory session, a lunch session. This is both to create that sense of knowing and caring and building a strong relationship to get more trusting and honest responses from the kids. And it's just also a means to sort of convey to them and help build up some of their skill sets and approaches. You know, and people then ask, well, is there any evidence on who's better as a success mentor? Is it better if it's adults in the school? Is it better if it's external partners that work in the school? Is it better if it's students? And what we found is it doesn't matter as long as they can do the work. As long as they can form those relationships, and we're going to see in a minute what that entails. As long as they can interact with a student 3 times a week, maybe 2 shorts, 1 long. As they have access to data and they can share what they're learning with the school administration or the attendance team or the data review team, it works. Often it's best to start with just the adults in the building, any adult, from teachers to support staff to cafeteria to security guards, each just working first with 1 or 2 kids, and only those that are willing. You can never force anybody to be a mentor. You can't assign somebody to be a mentor. They have to want to be a mentor. But many, many places we found that when you get those first few willing people to do it, and you most always will find some willing to do it, that they then report back to others that they themselves get jazzed and feel benefits from being a mentor, because they're able to see that their efforts are having direct impacts on students. And that's one of the reasons many people get into teaching, or most people get into teaching, is to help kids. And it's often a long arc to see you change their academic profile. But if you can do something and work with them and suddenly they're coming to school more often, you feel that direct impact. You feel you're making a difference and you get energized. And that's contagious and brings more adults in the building wanting to be mentors. External mentors are a very powerful supplement to that, internal mentors, especially when you have a large number of kids. You may well have to bring in or use some of your external partners, folks that are already associated with the school in one form or another, or the connections you can make. And many folks have had successful working with peers, 12th graders working with 9th graders, 8th graders working with 6th graders. You have to put organization into this. You have to select some effort into selecting the kids, some guidance, but then it can be very powerful. A quick variation folks have done of this, and then after I cover this, I'll say I'm going to pause for some questions, is they have a 9th grader be a captain of, sorry, a 12th grader be a captain of a 9th grade classroom. And they tell them, as being the captain of your classroom, the first thing that I ask of you is that you're here every day to be part of our team. And then you just, you know, actually all that happens then is other 9th graders will start texting the kids, where are you, we need you here, the captain expects you here. And that's a variation, a supplement to the mentoring, but another way to use and leverage peers to give yourselves more person power to be able to reach large numbers of chronically absent kids. Before we move on to do a little more detail on success mentors and then some of those other components, I'm going to pause here because I believe some questions have been building up. Veronica?
Yes. Hi, Bob. We do have a couple of questions. So the first one is, how frequently do you recommend that school teams take a look at the attendance data for all students? And then a follow-up question for students who miss 10% or more of school.
Yeah, so we really recommend this progress monitoring happens on at least a biweekly basis, because that really lets you pick up who's trending there, who's had a bad 2 weeks that didn't have a bad 2 weeks before, so there could be something current that we need to address. And also lets you see who are the kids that we're working on, is it making a difference? If you go too much longer, you're both missing the ability to pick up those kids where something recently has happened, and you're getting a pretty long time before you're checking in that our strategies working, are they making a difference? So much of attendance work is about continuous improvement. There's no magic one way to make it work. It's a lot of trial and error and fine-tuning and making evidence-based strategies that work in general work in your specific circumstances. So we've really found that at least that biweekly checking of the data is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. And is that for all students, Bob, or just the students who are shown to be missing 10% or more of classes?
Well, ideally, you are progress monitoring all kids, and you have a way to sort of, once kids have hit that 10% rule, they're flagged in some way or another. And so you're looking at all, but the ones you're reacting to are those that have reached the 10% threshold.
Great. All right, our second question is, can you say more about what types of community-based organizations are best to join the weekly attendance meeting?
Yeah, so you're looking for those community organizations that can really provide those youth and social service supports that are addressing the out-of-school reasons usually that kids can't come to school. So that could be health providers, and again, they can rotate for, let's say, if it's like asthma or some other sort of chronic health conditions, because we know that working with like school nurses and others, that there's very few health conditions that cannot be properly managed, that kids have to be out of school because of them. But we also know that many schools by themselves don't have the capacity to manage those conditions. So that, I would say, health providers is a key one. Another thing that often affects attendance of kids is variations of homelessness or transience in housing. So again, partners that can help find ways to stabilize housing for kids are often another important provider to have. It also just varies by your community. Many schools, if they're near large sort of public housing projects, and engage with the public housing community as a partner. So it is those folks that are most positioned to deal with sort of the out-of-school challenges that are keeping your kids from being in school every day.
All right. That's all we have for now, Bob. So you can go ahead and continue.
Okay. Thank you. So success mentors we're talking about, and how almost any adult can be them, and even peers. And it's really, as long as they do the work. So the work is here, right? It's reaching out to kids and families. It's recognizing and celebrating success. It's you know, the daily greeting that you're excited to see them. It's tracking, you know, so they know someone's watching if they're there or not. It's reaching out to them. It's doing the small group work, and then it's connecting back to the school staff, and as appropriate, following all, you know, appropriate safety and confidentiality rules and so forth, sharing what is being learned about what's keeping kids out of school. And as I said, this is really our relationship team right here, these success mentors. And we partnered in our national center here with Mentor. They're a great organization, and their website also has many rich resources, and there's a link at the end of this presentation. And one of the things they've taught us is really what does this mean for mentors, and how can they sort of build relationships. And this is, you know, I won't go word for word, but it's really about creating shared interests, a sense of trust, a sense of respect, and, you know, a sense of, you know, I am here to give you support. Others have really demonstrated what's really critical about this is the ability to solve small problems and to give support without pity, right? So the kids don't feel like, oh, you're doing this because you feel sorry for me. No, you're doing this because you think I have great potential and you're helping me realize it, right? Those are important differences, how it's perceived. Bringing data back in, our dialogue here between our air and water, data and relationships, is, as we said, these success mentors need to be able to get data on their kids' attendance, their mentees' attendance. Some folks just think this is impossible to solve. It's not. Many of our communities have solved this. And again, on the website, in both the webinars and in the tools section, there's some examples of how this has been done. And then secondly, mentors themselves have got to feel connected to this work. You don't want it to be, well, you have mentors, they come in, they talk to our kids, it's off in a corner, we just make sure it's safe and appropriate, but beyond that, we're not exactly sure what goes on. That leaves the mentors feeling very disconnected from this work. So oftentimes people have created like lead mentors or captains of a group of mentors that actually attend those weekly meetings. So there can be, and they can then give dialogue back to connect them to how what they're doing is helping the school and what the school is doing so they can help reinforce it. And just a way for them to be able to share the appropriate ways what they're learning and to have access as needed to be able to refer their students to the right people that can get them to those youth and social service providers, right? Because there are things that come up with their mentee, that problems that they're not in the capacity to solve, and they need to have really easy ways to pass that on to someone in the school who can get the kid to the right support for that solution. So we never get too far away from our data even when we're focused on our relationship drivers. All right, 2 more pieces of the puzzle, and then we'll be able to stop and have a broader discussion. It says we're building the system, and it really is important. It's not just the mentors. It's not just the data. It's the whole combination. Is that, again, as we know, in the most impacted schools, we're talking often scores, if not hundreds of kids, that we cannot individually intervene, even with strong success mentor programs and other means, our way out of that. We've got to think about ways to reduce chronic absenteeism at the school and grade and classroom level. And much of this is really this positive school climate, which really addresses both those avoidance issues, things kids are avoiding in school, and the disengagement issues. So that's making students feeling welcome in school. It's celebrating good, but also improving attendance. And here, what we've really learned is it's not about the stuff. It's not about having actual incentives. You come 10 days in a row and you get a lottery ticket for X, Y, and Z stuff. That can work sometimes, sort of spice it up, have a little bit of excitement, but it can't be the primary strategy because, A, it's very hard to sustain, and over time it loses its power. What keeps its power is social recognition, right? It's something kids crave, especially adolescents. So things as simple as homeroom shout-outs for the homeroom with the most improved attendance that week, things like putting pictures up in the wall of the kids with improved attendance for the week, you know, the attendance stars of the week, just simple shout-out recognitions and even pieces of paper certificates. You know, we've had many examples of schools being uncertain about this, not thinking that adolescents would respond, and then to very simple things, getting very emotional reactions from kids. And the kids afterwards will say, like, I've never been recognized for anything in my life, right? And you can see how that small thing then is very impactful. Another key thing, and this is again where a small change can have a pretty big difference, and that once understanding it, teachers are pretty responsive to it. It's to be careful about the inadvertent use of sarcasm when chronically absent students return to school. So adults are frustrated when their kids are not there on a regular basis, especially if they don't understand why. And they sort of then infer some reasons, right, that maybe are not, in their mind, so valid. And so then a normal human reaction in those circumstances, and when the kid returns to school, is to be a little bit sarcastic. Oh my God, John, you're in school today. I better play the lotto. I'm never going to have a luckier day, right? It seems like a small thing. It's letting some adult frustration out. But to that kid, they may have had to go through a lot to get there that day. That's sending an immediate signal that they're not really wanted. And it sort of sends them running back away from school. Once adults are aware they do this, and often it's done almost without great consciousness about it, they can stop. And then finally, again, using our data is really finding those school climate conditions affecting attendance, for groups of students. Where they're feeling unsafe in the building, let's make that feel safe. Who and where and when is being bullied, let's address that. Let's reconsider our policy of sort of trying to be punitive when kids are late or missing assignments. I cannot tell you how many kids we've interviewed who told us, I skipped school because I knew if I went in I was late, I'd get yelled at. I don't want to be yelled at, it's better to say I was sick. I didn't go into the third period because second period I didn't get my work done. And if you don't have your work done, Mrs. Jones embarrasses you. There's some reasons why people do those things. They can sometimes be effective, but we have to think about the unintended consequences of creating more things for more kids to avoid in school and giving them more reasons to say, I'll go third period, not second. If I miss the bus, it's better to be absent than to get yelled at for being late. All right. We've talked a little bit about this already through our Q&A and other things, but it really is important to really increase your partners because a good number of the reasons why kids aren't in school are things happening outside of school. And while school is a good place to understand them and analyze them and think about solutions and create counter reasons to come, because some things you can't change, but maybe you can create a strong enough pull for kids to come despite it, right? But we also got to worry about trying to change them. And that's this idea about youth and social service providers. And oftentimes, they find it hard to be linked up with schools. They find it hard to sort of, break that schoolhouse door barrier and actually bring in, sometimes they have great knowledge of effective interventions or other people out there who can help students. So it's really important to try to understand what your kids' needs are, find the right youth and social service providers, and bring them to the table. And then I'm just jumping back one more last point. I'm going to go back to the positive school climate, is that it's also important, we've found from many places, to sort of build places where students can experience success, right? Because if part of this engagement, I don't feel very successful in school, and it's hard to keep going when I don't feel success. And oftentimes, where kids demonstrate and feel success are things like drama team, dance team, robotics team, theater group, chess club. And what we have to remind ourselves there is that sometimes and again, as a way to create incentive for kids to come, it's often becoming more common for schools to put conditions on participation in those sort of activities where kids can show and experience success by saying we only let kids with good attendance come to those things. And I think we really have to reconsider that sometimes, because sometimes that's the very place for some kids that are struggling where they can feel success because that's shorter cycles between effort and reward. There's multiple chances to try. It's often done in a group peer-based setting, not individual. Those can be some of the best draws to engage kids who are disengaged. And we may have to rethink some of these policies that are trying to make this, for the kids that come, get this, the kids that don't get yelled at or get told to do makeup work by themselves without support. So we really have to think about the push and pull activities we can do to sort of at the school level to address chronic absenteeism when it occurs in large numbers. So then we're getting close to the end of our presentation and getting Q&A. But again, as I to hammer my point home again, is we're able to distill down some core lessons, the power of data, who, when, why, where, at what level, what magnitude, when is it just happening, and when are kids walking in with a prior history, where can we find strategic solutions by finding groups of kids with similar causes. That's our air, abundant, created in the right way is very powerful, combined with relationships. We have to change behaviors or solve problems, hard to do without a relationship. Combine the relationships with the data, both get better root causes, and we can create more powerful systems where we combine data reviews with success mentors, our relationship drivers, with better schools to pull kids in and not push them out, school climates, and then finally integrated youth service providers. You do that, you'll have done a lot. It's a lot of work. You got to work with it over time, over trial and error. We found and continuous improvement. But even once you've done that, we've learned there's more that can be done, because this is a continual challenge, and that's why I want to just direct you back again at the end to the website and just give you an example of some of the webinars you will find there. Things that will let you go deeper about how we identify root cause, how we build resource maps so we can really understand what we can pull, how we overcome some mentor challenges that are inevitable, how we can build cultural competence with our mentors, and how we can address our most vulnerable students, those in foster care, juvenile justice. Along with early warning, how do we bring in growth mindsets? How do we, overcome student resistance? So you can see there's sort of more advanced topics that you need to keep working on once you get some basics in place. And I just want to again remind folks that the website and the webinars within it represents a very rich learnings from the field over the past few years that I really encourage you to dive deep. And with that, I thank you for listening to the content of our presentation today, and we'll now turn it over to some more questions from you.
Thanks so much, Bob. So we did have a question come in, but we also had a comment, so I'll quickly read out this comment for you. One participant said, I really like the concept of using older students to help build a school, quote-unquote, family to help support attendance, engagement, relationships, and accountability as mentors.
Indeed, and that's really what we need to do, and it's a good way. As I said, we have to see how we get more person power involved in having outreach and creating conditions that encourage and enable chronically absent kids or those trending towards it to reverse that and be able to attend on a regular basis.
Yep. And our question is, are there any different approaches to addressing attendance issues, both individual student and system-wide, at the secondary level versus the elementary level?
Well, both similarities and differences. Oftentimes at the elementary level, especially early, like pre-K, K, first grade, it's as much family challenges as student individual challenges that are in the way of regular attendance. So it's important to be working holistically with the family to really understand what supports they need to be able to help their kids be in school every day. That can continue, but it often continues at a little lower magnitude. And you know, it's by early adolescence that kids can independently make the decision: am I going to school today or not? And in many places, especially larger cities that depend on mass transportation, a parent can see the kids get on the bus, but at the transfer point, the students could go left and not right, and because they're taking mass transportation, there's no way for the schools to know, like, did they leave or not, because it's not like you just get on a yellow bus and stay on the yellow bus all the way. Also, at the older levels, you get things like students taking time off to work to help pay the electric bill, or to, you know, take care, do elder care or sibling care. So some of the underlying causes of chronic absenteeism really vary, but I would say the basic approach of monitoring, forming relationships with the family and the students, leveraging that trust to understand root causes, and then creating both individual and looking for larger patterns to create higher level strategic solutions remains the same.
Great. All right. So I don't see any other questions that have come in, Bob. And, you know, I want to give folks one last chance to submit. So, you know, in these last few minutes, I just want to remind everyone that, unfortunately, our time as project directors for the National TA Center has come to an end at the end of this month. So, unfortunately, we are hopeful that another funding opportunity for this project will come along. You know, we understand the importance of this work and that we continue to build these tools and these opportunities for us to come together as a network and share best practices and, you know, new innovations to address these important issues. So just know that we aren't, you know, leaving you, you know, totally abandoned. We definitely have a number of other resources that you can tap into. Some of these are on the slide that you see now: the Attendance Works website, the Mentor website, the Everyone Graduates Center website, which I can put up here in the chat box in just a second. The Jobs for the Future website. There are a ton of organizations out there that we partner with that are great to tap into for a variety of resources and tools and technical assistance opportunities, as well as the national website that Bob has mentioned several times throughout the course of this presentation. So, you know, with that, I don't see any other questions coming in. Bob, did you want to, you know, have any closing comments for us?
I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I'm guessing some of you are repeat customers to our webinars and our conferences, and I just want to thank everyone for the work they're doing every day to help kids come to school, stay focused in class, and get their work done, and really carrying on the work of this center and the work you're doing. And just want to say, keep doing it. Thanks.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for the time you spent today and the information that you've shared with us. Hopefully you all found it very helpful and informative. Just a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on the National TA Center website. I put that website URL in the chat box for you, so you can go ahead and click on that there to access the website. Unfortunately, that website will not be updated with new content after, you know, the next couple of weeks, but this webinar will be posted on there, so you'll be able to access it. It probably won't be up for a couple of days, so just, you know, check back. And with that, again, thank you, Bob. Thank you, all of you, for being on the line today, and we hope to see you again at a future event or future webinar that we'd host related to the National TA Center. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.